The Justice League needs no introduction, but I'm gonna do it anyway. They weren't the first superhero team, or the most profitable if we go by movie metrics, but they are the archetypical one most satires of the genre look to, or what the common man recognizes as the go-to superhero team. An even roster of 7-odd members that eventually expands into a global, nay galactic affair that takes care of all imminent threats both terrestrial and beyond our comprehension. While their inaugural roster in 1960 consisted of Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, the Silver Age Flash, Green Lantern, Aquaman, and of course Martian Manhunter, the legend of the Justice League's founding would change with the tides of canon. After the first crisis, it was decided that Wonder Woman would be a relatively new character, only leaving Themyscira after a league was already formed. And this league would only have Superman temporarily, being primarily led by Martian Manhunter, with Black Canary taking the reins as the only girl of the team. No Trinity? No problem. While Batman would inevitably join the League and even help lead the Justice League International in the late 1980s, by that point the Justice League as we typically imagined them was no longer a thing. Instead of it being the hardest heavy hitters of the entire DC pantheon, it was a squad full of B to D-list heroes working under a UN charter. And while this particular incarnation of the League is a cult favorite for plenty of reasons, one of which being it's just really funny, this team, both creatively and in universe, would sadly not last. At the end of JLI's initial 26-issue run, the book was split into 3 separate titles, the first of which being JLA, which maintained Giffen, DeMatteis, and McGuire as creative staff, Justice League Europe, which had several members both familiar and exotic, and Justice League Quarterly, which followed some of the Leaguers in their own solo stories. This incarnation of the JLA would last well into the 90s, only ending when Grant Morrison came into the fold and relaunched the Justice League title into probably its most famous run. The other 2 titles, Europe and Quarterly, were not so lucky. While they were able to chug along into the 90s, a relaunch of the Justice League books with several new writers and artists pivoted Justice League Europe ironically back into Justice League International, introduced a third strike team led by Martian Manhunter called Justice League Task Force, and after a year or so, inevitably canceled Justice League Quarterly and the newly labeled International book, turning it into Extreme Justice! And while some members of the original Justice League roster still existed amongst these separate teams, not all of them were out-and-out members of this fraternity of heroism. Even their founder, because he stopped existing. Introducing Triumph! The electromagnetic Superman with a mind as sharp as nails, a body honed to inhuman perfection, and a personality that, well, we'll get to that. Training his whole life to be a superhero after his own father, a goon for the supervillain Dr. Cobalt, was tried and convicted as the ne'er-do-well's accomplice, and inspired by our man of all people who appeared at his window to tell him not to follow in his father's footsteps after, catching him personally. William McIntyre one day woke up to discover he had powers directly tied into the Earth's magnetic core. The now 21-year-old criminology major found in the middle of the wilderness a crash site for aliens known as Plasma Men, who also feed on the same electromagnetic field as he does for their powers. In their attempt at destroying the world to suck out its innards via the White House, McIntyre, under the name Triumph, recruits the finest heroes of his age who can help him in his crusade. Except for Batman. Because he doesn't have powers. Yeah. And in this mission, it becomes extremely clear that while all of these heroes are new to the idea of working together, they're all more than willing if Superman is here leading the charge. Which he isn't, because he's kind of afraid of doing so, and is more than willing to give the reins to Will, who is a dick. While it's understandable why, given he spent a lot of his young life hiding the truth of his parentage and isolating himself to train for his idealistic goal, that sort of sob story doesn't play during the heat of battle, especially when he's barking orders at Hal Jordan, who does not like him at all. Only here because, again, Superman is. So when the going gets tough and nearly 2 members die due to his incompetence, Triumph puts the mission first and absorbs large quantities of electromagnetic energy, focusing it at the space-time pod the Plasma Men were using, warping it and himself out of existence, removing both the memory of him from the world at large, as well as the incident that drove these heroes together. He comes back a decade in universe later due to Hal Jordan, who again hated him, starting another crisis! This time affecting the time stream as he attempts to rewrite the past, giving everyone their ideal present, during 0 Hour. Triumph blinks into existence again and tries to find the League, but is only left with the remnants of JLI after their charter had been revoked and former member Ice being killed in a prior mission. While he at first fights every remaining member of this team, including Elron, an alien AI now in control of the body of Despero, mind-controlling conqueror and known supervillain, The gang join Triumph in a journey to the nation's capital, hoping to find and stop the Plasma Men before they awaken and destroy the world. And thanks to an angry Martian Manhunter who doesn't remember Triumph despite fighting alongside him all those years ago, they do. After being bitch-smacked awake and told to help them, Triumph leads the charge on the Plasma Men, learning in the process to protect his new teammates despite the mission's priority and defeating the aliens once and for all. While John Jones offers Triumph a spot among the Leaguers after this moment, it won't be until after Zero Hour where he's made an official member of Justice League Task Force. That's right, he's not fighting alongside Superman or Wonder Woman or even Wally West, who has since taken the mantle as the Flash. Oh, no. John's logic is that since Triumph is both bitter due to missing out on the golden age of heroism and his rightful spot within it, as well as his retained youth at the ripe age of 21, he will mentor Triumph on his new task force, which he's formed to both do good and train upstarts like himself. This is where Triumph meets the Ray, who isn't gay yet, but will be in the 2000s. They start as fast friends given their age and extremely overpowered abilities, but over time their personalities clash, resulting in very key moments in Triumph's journey. This is also where Triumph meets Gypsy, who, okay, I know DC is trying to be very PC these days, but how the fuck did Gypsy not get renamed after all these years? She's still called that even in the Flash TV show. It's a literal slur. Whatever, they're in an enemies to lovers type beat, but their feelings won't culminate in anything until the very end of Task Force. So, alongside Elron and inevitably a new team member that breaks into their base for misguided revenge called Mystek, who's actually a girl wearing a guy suit of alien armor, pretty clever honestly, Triumph takes part in missions fighting Vandal Savage's machinations as he makes a startling discovery. He's rich. Back in college of all places, Triumph invested in a co-op clothing store that would eventually become the Home Shopping Network.
Kill yourself!
So given his excess of free time between missions and his life goal only being to fight the never-ending war on crime, Triumph invests his money both into the task force as well as his own private outfit of vigilantes he found online called Victims of Violent Crime.
However, regretful over the lives he couldn't save in a plane crash in his own solo series and being lured to Vandal Savage's side,
the Ray leaves Task Force around the same time Triumph is fighting with Martian Manhunter over using his money to fund Victims of Violent Crime, as well as taking his own quadjet for good measure. This moment really stings Triumph, both Ray leaving when the team needs him, as well as John not trusting him to protect the world when he should be off the clock. And given the work he does with this Fast and the Furious-esque group of found family turned bounty hunters, it's not hard to see why. Victims of Violent Crime don't really mesh with Triumph's do-or-die attitude at first, especially when he tries firing one of their own members for constantly going against his tight, to-the-minute plans. But after his own father escapes from prison due to the machinations of Dr. Cobalt's illegitimate son, things start to change. He starts to rely on Wilma, Father Rocco, and their leader Fang, who he develops romantic feelings for and who saves him after Cobalt shatters his spine! Now only able to stand while using his powers as his body slowly heals, Triumph has more than enough reasons to stop taking the lead and let other people show him the way to victory. And that's a great sentiment. But it's later invalidated when the Ray returns after quitting for Immortal Caveman Vandal Savage's company to ask Triumph for help in defeating the enemy known as Death Mask. Triumph saying no, claiming it's on behalf of Martian Manhunter due to him betraying the team, but after the Ray leaves, he's immediately scrutinized by John and Gypsy. This act of disobedience, as well as the idea planted in his head by his runaway convict father that regardless of his actions, he was putting others before himself, leads to him getting the snot beaten out of him by Martian Manhunter, fired from the League. And while fellow Leaguer Mystek rubs it in his face, he's still alerted, like every other prior member of the task force by Martian Manhunter, to their base when Elron is kidnapped and put on trial for Despero's crimes. While John goes off to deal with a series of wild supervillain threats appearing across the globe, Triumph and Ray accidentally send Gypsy out of the airlock and into the satellite below. As the rest of the task force go to save their friend, each of them are confronted with the cause of the very threats Manhunter went to face: the Demon Lord Neuron, who, in an event comic called Underworld Unleash, has been offering hero and villain alike a Faustian bargain for their greatest dreams at the cost of their mortal souls. While the Ray and Mystek deny any sort of devilish deal outright, Triumph is another story entirely. He's mocked by all of his worst fears and insecurities, told that he could regain the 10 years he lost on the planet Earth and become the legend he was supposed to be. All he needs to do is light Neuron's candle, and his soul is the only price. While the gang save Gypsy and go off to find Elron, Triumph contemplates everything he's been through since returning to the main timeline. Though his thoughts are cut short by Mystek's claustrophobia taking its toll, resulting in her breaching the ship's hull, sending Gypsy into the void, and Mystek to their untimely demise. Rip Bozo. John urges Triumph to save Gypsy after jump-starting the ship's internal gravity, Triumph retorting that he'll most likely die if he does. However, Triumph is a hero at his core and goes to save her, codifying their feelings. With the ship repaired, the gang go to save Elrond, but are woefully outnumbered as they discover Elrond has escaped on their own, never to be seen again. While the task force boards a ship back to Earth, the warp drive malfunctions and blasts the team into the pocket dimension home to sword and sorcery hero, Warlord. As the gang tries to find their way back home, Triumph attempts not killing the various barbarians that attack him by dulling his blade with his electromagnetism, investigating the wizard seemingly responsible for their appearance in this dimension, who has a nuke. Great. While he's unable to stop it on his own, Manhunter tells him that this dimension's planet has a hollow core and won't be enough to sustain his powers. So, flying toward the planet's sun and gaining as much energy as he did during the Plasma Men incident all those years ago, Triumph manages to stop the warhead and protect the planet from long-lasting damage. Returning home just in time for Christmas, the task force have a joint party with the JLA and Extreme Justice! Triumph surprising them dressed as Santa Claus and formally apologizing to John and the team. He says he's learned his lesson, but when John says he's not allowed back on the team, he throws a hissy fit. Great job, Will. Triumph storms off into the snow as Gypsy and Ray follow him, hoping to light the candle Neuron gave him before Gypsy arrives and reminds Triumph of all the good he's done, the people they've lost, how not being a part of the League isn't the end of the world. She seals her feelings for him with a kiss, Ray arriving to bicker with Triumph before the two hug it out like bros. Triumph leaves the Winter Wonderland without the candle, Ray and Gypsy not recognizing it since Triumph kept it a secret. So after Triumph's attempt at moving forward is finally set in motion, the two heroes unwittingly change the timeline by lighting Neuron's candle. The day resets. Elrond arrives as Santa instead of Triumph, having been saved by his friends. Triumph watches the party from outside, his 10 years as a Silver Age hero regained, but still not a member of the League. He disappears into the snow, a man without a soul, and without a purpose. Now, a bit of an aside. Triumph was created by writers Mark Waid and Christopher Priest, and while he was created for Zero Hour in particular, there was a sentiment shared around DC's offices and by the fanbase at large that stuck with Priest. Mainly, that nobody liked him, and he was a dick. So the longer the task force went on, they leaned into this abrasive characterization, coloring his interactions with a bitterness and self-righteousness that made him interesting to see bounce off of other characters. The ending of Task Force, both narratively and character-wise, is a fitting end to Triumph's journey, given his lust for recognition remains unfulfilled regardless of the timeline. While before the candle was lit, he had friends and allies to call his own, afterward, he's seemingly alone. No victims of violent crime, no best friend to rely on, or fortune from the Home Shopping Network. He's as lost as he ever was. And now, he has nothing holding him back. Triumph would return in a 4-issue arc in Grant Morrison's seminal JLA run from 1997. In a crossover with the Justice Society of America, Triumph is a now destitute man illegally selling League property to the highest bidder, and seemingly without his powers. For some reason, we'll get to why later. Triumph has attempted to sell a pen containing a 5th-dimensional genie named Lacuz, which activates during a sale and eliminates his clients, granting him everything he wants and more, if he wishes for it. So, Triumph once again has regained his powers, brainwashing Ray and Gypsy as they invade the Watchtower, hoping to take over. As the League and JSA try stopping Lacuz's rampage on the world, and the story formally establishes Jakeem Thunder as the new user of Johnny Thunder's magic pen, Superman associate and resident inventor played by Shaquille O'Neal named Steel is left to fend for himself as Triumph rampages through the satellite. During all of this, the League's resident angel named Zariel has joined forces with Alan Scott in their hopes of freeing the Spectre from their immortal prison, hoping to stop the Genie crisis and Triumph for good. With the help of Steel's Watchtower controller and Superman's awesome might, Triumph is fought off until the Spectre arrives, transmuting him into a statue of ice. Zariel, an angel of God's love, stops Spectre or anyone else from destroying the statue, believing that the man who doesn't have a soul should still be saved. At least someday. For now, though, he remains a fixture in the Watchtower until it blows up. And he dies off panel. So that's the end of Triumph. He has an illegitimate son that just acts like a kooky supervillain, but I'm ignoring that and his non-canonical appearance in Trinity because this one storyline kind of ruins the character. For one, Morrison clearly hasn't read Justice League Task Force, and it shows. Triumph's entire journey of self-discovery and self-loathing has been rolled back to make him a shallow, sad man who believes he's simply been slighted. Instead of a proper leaguer that no one wanted around, Superman even tells him in this story that he could have asked at any time to join the League, and he would have had a spot. Which I call bullshit on, because even back in the day, Clark did not like this guy, and if reality was rewritten to have him be a part of the Golden Age of Justice, why would he even be invited back when he wasn't a part of the prior League? How Triumph even talks about the events of Task Force is off too, because he doesn't even mention the victims of violent crime or Vandal Savage. He just says no one cheered for them, and they only fought no-name threats. It feels like the same kind of vitriolic fans who hated Triumph upon his creation wrote this story, without actually reading the stories he was involved in. I like Morrison's work, I really do, but this ain't it. Triumph, despite his dickish persona and overpowered abilities, is not a Gary Stu or a worthless addition to the DC pantheon. In my opinion, no character or idea is worthless. It takes a good writer and interesting execution to make even the stupidest ideas, such as the Lost Justice League member, work despite initial pushback. Triumph represents a fall from grace we don't typically see for heroes of his stature, an ironic twist on the Hal Jordan parallax scenario that makes his end all the more tragic. The team he comes from is underloved, the world he comes from doesn't exist anymore, and the life he lived was one of hardship and perseverance. Even if he was a dick to his friends and fired from the one place he technically founded, Triumph is still a fascinating character from the Dark Age of comics that I think deserves at least a little more attention. Remember kids, there are no bad ideas in fiction, just bad execution. For every Triumph, there's a Sentry. For every Agent Liberty, there's a US agent. And most importantly, for every poorly thought out expansion to a world already overloaded with costume characters, there's always one particular character someone will latch onto and want to see more of. Whether the fans or the creators even want to admit it, there will always be unironic fans of the Gay Ghost. Gay Ghost Bros rise up. Thank you for watching.